hello if you are new to my channel where I geek out about all things metal. So if you haven't seen any of these videos before, basically I go through some of my favourite albums that I've discovered this month, and they can be either new or some of the old ones which I may have missed out on. Now the first choice that I usually do is called my feature favourite, and that's the one I really want to shine a lot of light on. And for this month it's Cryptic Shift's Visitations from Enceladus. It's an amazing album that opens with a 26-minute song, which I think is the best way you could open a record. The band have toured previously with Voivod, Vector and Suffocation, but their sort of sound is pretty much like this interdimensional, intergalactic thrash meets death metal. So think of a combination of like if Gorguts and Voivod met death, and the kind of melodic aspects are really there. But what I really like about Cryptic Shift is that I think they're really bringing that, you know, cosmic death metal forward in the UK. And I think that the underground scene is really fantastic all over the world at the minute for death metal. One of the reasons I like cosmic death metal so much is that it just kind of, it takes you away, and it is a real sense of escapism, especially given that there's their own narrative that they've created for this album. It's without a doubt one of the most exciting releases that you'll hear this year in death metal. So my next choice is Anthethic with their brand new album Mythographer. So the guys are from Russia and they create this crazy kind of symbiosis of what the metal sort of vibe is, but within a sort of like a dancey sound. It's very cinematic and something I wouldn't necessarily have looked out or, you know, been able to find myself, but given that they were on Holy Raw, I listened to the band and I really enjoyed it. And if anything, it reminds me a bit of a crazier version of Tron, for example. So it's very, yeah, you know, like minimalist, electronic based, but also has this very wide scope. One of the things I do enjoy is the fact that even though it is dance and this sort of EDM, it has a lot of the qualities that I really enjoy in metal. So it's a great sort of halfway transition between the two. Panic Machine definitely has a kind of like a futuristic sense to it, and definitely reminded me of, you know, the likes of Muse and things like that, but before they got sort of soft. So I'm talking kind of like Absolution, Black Holes and Revelations era, and Origin of Symmetry, that kind of vibe. There's lots of energy and there's been a real buzz about the record, which was one of the reasons I wanted to check it out. And there is so much to kind of gain from each listen on this album, because, you know, what seems fairly kind of linear and on the surface is actually quite a lot once you really dig into it. And with the themes of craving a distraction, to be alone from, you know, with your own thoughts being a real problem, if anything, the album kind of came out at a brilliant time, because that's exactly what we were all doing, you know, in this pandemic. This is a really interesting band and a fantastic album for you guys to check out. Now, if you've listened to one Vader album, you've probably listened to all of them. However, I always think of them as the Motorhead of death metal, in that they will create the same album, and Solitude in Madness lasts maybe just over half an hour, but it is always really solid. And this record is no different. I think for a Vader record, it's probably one of the fastest that I've heard, but there's that, you know, classic sense of death metal groove that comes from this Polish band. And if you're not familiar with the band, they kind of have this blend of thrash meets death metal. If you're a Vader fan, don't expect anything different, but chances are you'll probably really love it. This album is progressive metal brilliance, and the first track will not leave your head for days. They've got a really kind of modern sound, particularly when it comes to the instruments, but then they have that sort of warm 70s quality, I think, really in the vocals. So it's kind of a really nice marriage of the two. Truth be told, I'd never really actually heard of them before, but then I found out that this is their first album in 14 years, and I think there used to be one of the members of Emperor that was in the band as well. But vocally, I really enjoy the kind of approach. It has that sort of Warrell Dane, like I said, warmth to it. And it is really, really interesting. It's a really great record and one I definitely recommend.
Now when facing both.
Now, this is something I had never heard of. A friend of mine, Dylan, put me onto this band and I really, really love them. They're kind of a combination of that sort of Russian circles instrumental sound, and over this month have been really great to kind of just block everything out, especially with it being instrumental. So the story is that in the year 2061, Earth has pretty much reached its scientific peak. The Earth is also being threatened by nuclear warfare and also environmental disasters. So it's kind of like this narrative of these cosmonauts that go out in search of like space and I'm guessing new life. But whilst this is going on, there's also a section of the album which is devoted to the opinions of people on Earth and how they think everything's happening, particularly with the kind of excerpts of astronauts and various different ideas. I think it's really, really interesting. I first got turned onto this this record from Van Records, which, as I'm sure you guys will remember, released Sweven, which is still one of my favourite records this year. But I love the production on it because it literally feels like a tombstone's just been dropped on your head. It's really, really heavy, but also sounds very clear, yet has that kind of rough and ready approach to it. So it's not like really polished. And there are these heavy guitar lines that really actually get stuck in your head. Like I found myself humming a couple of the riffs, and I don't normally do that with death metal. So I think that's a real kind of separation point for this band. Definitely listen to this band because you will not regret it. They're one of my favourite discoveries this year so far. So previously I was just kind of chatting on Instagram with everyone, and I asked people to send me recommendations of death metal bands, and my pal Dalton basically recommended this band called Worm and their album Gloomlord. So I gave it a listen and I was absolutely blown away. The band are from Miami in America, and you can really tell those kind of Florida death metal influences are on this record. So there are sections where it sounds a little bit like Obituary, but then there are some fantastic melodies, you know, kind of like Death era. But then you've also got the sense of doom, which really kind of like envelops the record, I think. But I can't recommend this LP enough. It was a real discovery and I'd never heard of Worm, so I really, really appreciate the heads up. Imagine if you had Horrendous meet with more of a heavy metal sort of sound, but also have a thrash influence, and that's kind of where you're going with Horrified. And I think there's such a fantastic sense of melody on this EP, and they really experiment with, you know, that classic death metal sound, but like I said, implement, you know, the sort of anthemic feel of heavy metal. And they're a UK-based band that deserve all of your attention, and not to mention the vinyl looks absolutely beautiful. It's this kind of like yellowy black swirl that they've got. Definitely don't sleep on these guys. Really, really highly recommended. And finally we come to my last album, which is Mortiferum and their brand new album Disgorge from Psychotic Depths. They're a US band, and as you can imagine they've got a heavy dose of death doom, but I really like the kind of insidious melodies that they've got with these Slayer-esque kind of leads. I don't know, it's not necessarily, you know, those kind of dive bomb style guitar solos, but more of the South of Heaven, really kind of malevolent sound. They've got this amazing sense of atmosphere going on, which I think I'm quickly realizing is one of my favorite kind of things about Death Doom, and that's really what makes it sound like, you know, this sort of creatures lurking out of the crypt. And Mortiferum do that absolutely brilliantly, but they also have that sort of barraging death metal sound with them as well. And I hope there's going to be a new pressing of the album, because I need this record on vinyl. All of these records deserve your time, and really don't miss out on them, because you'll be kicking yourself just as I did. So thank you ever so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I also hope that you discovered maybe some new bands or new albums you might not have heard of. If you did, hit that like and subscribe button, and also make sure to drop a comment. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at The Metal Tris. Most importantly though, be safe, and I will see you guys very, very soon for next month's monthly favourites. Take care, friends.